start. So principle for compost soil, for compost production, right? But before we start to talk about compost, we will pass again from some of our basic topics that we've been talking in our previous sustainable agriculture webinars, right? Specifically, let's talk about organic matter, because compost is not another thing than just a way to process and add organic matter to our soil. So organic matter, it's the remaining of decomposed organism, plants, animal, or any other living being. The decomposition process is mostly carried out by microorganisms that naturally inhabit in the soil. So microorganisms play a key role when we are talking about composting, because they're responsible to done this process, right? My bad. So let me mute. I'm having some problem with my audio. Pam, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so soil-dwelling animals such as worm, insects, and other invertebrates also participated. It's not just the microflora from the soil, but the microflora from the soil are carry the bigger part of that decomposition of organic matter. So from this process is what we obtain what we call humus, and we will be talking within the next few slides about humus in detail. So let's talk about the soil microflora. So the soil microflora, it's really important. As I always mention, soil, it is not, so my bad. So I have some noise. Let me check what's happening. Okay, I'm returning in just in a minute.
So while we wait for Wadis, anyone that would like to let us know at this point, where are you at when it comes to composting? Do you already have a compost system? If so, could you please explain what it's all about? And if not, what is keeping you from having a compost system at this point? You can use the chat and feel free to let us know a little bit about your own composting experiences. We would love to hear about those as well. We are live, people, so it's the fun part of this.
Okay, I'm back. My bad, and my apologies to all of our attendees. So let's keep talking about microorganisms and their role on healthy soils and compost. So soil microflora, I was saying that, as always I mentioned, soil, it's a living medium. Despite what conventional agriculture practices has been promoting for the last 60, 70 years since the Green Revolution, soil is not just a medium for crops to anchor in and to obtain water. So instead of this, soil is a living medium, and most of the life in soils are microorganisms. For a healthy soil, for a good production, the key is to keep that soil alive, right? So some of the functions of those microorganisms are they are primary agents in the nutrient cycle. So they have the capacity to process all that organic matter in the soils and make it able to the plants to get their nutrients, right? Regulate the dynamics of soil organic matter, decomposition and recycle of that organic matter, as I just mentioned a few slides ago, sequestration of organic carbon and other greenhouses. So healthy soils with healthy living soils have the potential to reduce the greenhouses gases, right? So that's have the impact to maintain or delay or even to cool our planet, right? So all of those know, especially us that we live in the tropic, what are some of the consequences of climate change, right? So They also modify the physical structure of the soil. They help to improve the structure of the soil as well. When we have soil with better structure, are less prone to erosion and have the capability to retain more water. So it is really important that our soil have that that capacity, because one of the huge list of defects of the climate change, especially in our region in the tropics, are that within the next few years, the forecast is to have longer dry seasons, right? So that's important to keep building and improving our soils. As well, they improve the acquisition, as I mentioned, of nutrients by plants and the health of the plants, because most of those microorganisms living on the soil have the potential to maintain regulated all the pathogens in the soil, even bacteria, fungus, or even nematodes, okay? So that's the reason why we want to keep our soil alive. This is an example for how important it is that the microorganisms in the soils and to keep them working well, right? So the soil hosts a quarter of our planet biodiversity. So just think about every living thing that humankind knows in the entire planet. So soils hold a quarter of that diversity, right? So it is estimated that they are more organisms in a tablespoon of healthy soil than people on Earth, right? So just imagine this. Imagine how important those organisms are for our daily normal function in our planet. So that I was just passing through those again, through those basic topics. So now let's talk about what I was mentioning of humus, because when we are talking about in terms of organic matter and how to have it in soil, it is not just another thing that we want to have it in this state on humus. And humus, it is not the food that we make from chickpeas that it's really good, but humus is a term that we use to refer to organic matter in its maximum state of decomposition. And I put maximum quote unquote because that humus will keep decomposing in soil. Again, with the action of the microorganisms, the humus, that organic matter, will keep decomposing, and it will produce a substance that we know as a fulvic, humic, and humans, fulvic acid, humic acid, and humans. They will stay in the soil in a form that it is really stable, and all that good characteristics that those substances promoting the soil will keep there for longer periods, right? As well, you can buy in a commercial form, right? In a commercial formulation, the humic acids and these kind of products, but it is better when we are applying organic matter and it's occurring in our soil in a natural way, right? So when we are talking about organic matter in a humus form, at this point, we cannot identify where the material came from, especially due its size, okay? So at this point, we could not differentiate if that humus comes from a branch of a tree, or I'm just exaggerating, right? But from a leg of a person, okay? I'm just making that exaggeration just to try to paint a clear picture of what I'm talking about it, right? So this is the way that the humus should looks. That's real humus, right? And I just put in those images here. And I'm talking about all of this because, as I always talk when I always mention when I'm talking about compost, in my experience as agronomist, as well as food producer, before I came to WCK, I done many of my work was as independent consultant, and it was really, really normal to me to visit a farm, and the producers there told me about, I'm just trying to use compost, but my plant looks like they got sick, or they got in a bad shape, or the conditions are worse are worse than prior to the compost. And then when I check the material, it is not compost, it is not humus, it is wood chips and compost that it is not ready yet, right? So what happened with this in the soil when you apply this raw material, it is that those microorganisms that we have been talking, they will use the nitrogen in the soil to decompose, to keep decomposing the carbon in the material, right? So that will cause a shortage from nitrogen to the plants, right? So that's the reason why it is really important when we are talking about to use organic matter, this kind of material or compost, to know what is mature compost, right? And mature compost, it is not another thing than this. It is humus. It is organic matter in one on its maximum state of decomposition, right? So the properties of that material, of that organic matter, are the slow release, release and store of nutrients for plant, food source for the soil microflora or microbiota, high nutrient exchange capacity with the plants, high water retention. The organic matter have the potential to retain up to the 90% of its weight in water, help improve and maintain the soil structure. And I just mentioned, with the microorganism, which also prevent soil erosion, because it is a cementing agent. So that means that when we are talking about soil from agricultural purposes, soil it's formed by three particles that just differ one of other in size, right? It's silt, clay, and sand. So what organic matter do, it is that work like a kind of glue that join all of those particles and create what we call aggregates. And those aggregates will improve the soil structure. So when you have aggregates in the soil, it's really good because first, soil is less prone, as you can see in that slide, to erosion, but as well, those aggregates help to create pores in our soil. So if we have a huge event of water, the water could infiltrate through those macropores in the soil, but as well, inside those aggregates, we will find micropores, and the micropores will retain water and will store water in the right way in the soil, and that water could be able for the plants when needed, especially during drought seasons, right? So that's one of the good qualities to apply organic matter to the soil. So it's modify the pH or the acidity of the soil. So my bad, I just used the wrong word there. It's not damping, it is the buffer, have a buffer effect of the soil, especially in the tropics where we find most of our soil are kind of acid soils. The organic matter have the potential to increase those pH, but as well, because it is a buffer, if our pH is really high, the organic matter have the potential to lower that pH. So an adequate pH for most of our crops, we desire to have that pH in the soil around 7, say 6.5, 7. You know, that's the ideal pH for many of the crops that we can produce, right? So the organic matter have this potential too, right? So how do we add organic matter to the soil? There are many ways, but today we will be talking about the compost, right? I just want to ask all of you just to close your eyes and imagine that you are in the middle of the forest. Okay, everybody? Nice. Okay, now open your eyes. You're in the middle in the forest and you see all those trees, all those plants growing sturdy, so green, so big, right? And you will ask, where those plants got their fertility, right? No one's go there and add any fertilizer, right? So those plants have all their nutrients to grow in that way because of the natural cycles that are happening in the soil. Those recycling of all the material from the leaves uh, that the soil received from the trees, from the plants that die, for other organisms that die, and it's keep all that recycling of nutrient that are happening there. If you go to the forest and you just move some leaf and grab this topsoil, that's upper layer of dirt of the soil, will smell well. It will look like the picture of the humus I just show, right? So what we do with the compost, our compost of the composting process, is to make that process, but in a faster way, because our farm soils are not passing through that natural cycle, right? So that's mean that we can, or if we don't employ the right practices in our farm, we have the potential to worst our soil, right? Worst our condition of the soil. So that's the reason we make compost. They are, as I mentioned, there are other ways to add organic matter to the soil, but one of the best ways to produce or add organic matter to the soil are the compost systems, especially when we are talking about intensive bioagriculture or intensive agriculture, that we don't have the chance to leave the soil in our rotation, some parts of our farm, to rest and recharge, right? So one of the ways to do not split the nutrients and compromise the quality of our soil is adding organic matter by composting, producing by compost, right? So what is compost? Compost it is the product of a process by which organic waste, because there's no waste in especially when we are talking about the sustainable agriculture method or practices, they are no waste. They are precious material that we can use to reincorporate in our soil, right? That material is decomposed by the action of microorganisms and natural organisms in an aerobic way. And it is really important that when we are making our compost, we need to ensure that we have enough air through those piles of compost to make our process more efficient, right? So it is the process of recycling nutrients and providing life to the soil. It is the way that take advantage of material that would otherwise become a waste, right? And we don't have to, because many of that material, of vegetative material, sometimes ends in the landfills, and we are losing that kind of really, for me, that material does not have any the value could not calculate the value that material have, right? So when we are talking about the compost, or when we are decide to make our compost system in our farm or whatever or in the area that we want to make it, so the first thing that we need to think about it's the location of the project, right? The location of if you will have one pile, two piles, the area for composting, right? So this place should not have an excessive humidity or a shade, because one of the factors that it is really important and promote the composting cycle, it is the humidity on the pile of compost. If we have a high humidity, so the compost process will not happen. And if we don't have the right, so if we have our piles so dry, the microorganisms there and the temperatures will never rise, and the compost process will never happen, right? So the area where it's located must have a good drainage. Why? Because if we have a huge event of a rain, we don't want to all that water stay within our compost area, because just what I just mentioned. It is ideal to have a direct light sunlight from approximately 6 hours a day. And when I'm talking about direct light, I'm talking that if you are stand in this area, you can see the sun for at least 6 hours a day, right? It is not that have natural light, but I don't see the sun. So it is really important to have at least 6 hours of direct sun. So close to a water source, because what I just mentioned, if we don't have the right amount of water, if it's too dry, so the compost process will not happen. And within the next few slides, we will see a graphic that shows how the temperature and the time will rise, right? It should stand in it shouldn't stand in the passage of runoff water, mainly because in this process, with all that decomposition and all that organic matter that we have there, that organic matter will be releasing some nutrients, right? And if those nutrients that concentrated there get in that runoff water, and that runoff water ends in a river or an other water body, that could cause some adverse condition there, especially when we have huge inputs on water bodies of nutrients. It causes a bloom of microalgae, and those conditions will promote anoxic conditions in that body water that could damage all or most living things there, right? So we need to make sure that we conduct those water to a safe place to keep this within our compost area, right? As well, we does not just have to the options of make it in an open field in piles. So if we are doing compost in a small to medium scale, we can use some containers, right, as the ones that we will see here. So the picture you can see on at the left in this slide, it is a compost area made by wood. When I was starting farming back then, I have a structure like this, but I use pallets to build it, right? So the pallets are cheap or free material, but they will decompose too during the pass of the month. So if you will use that kind of material, if you will use pallets to make this kind or like kind of that structure, so just be careful because of the nails and other metals that pallets have, right? Not just keep safe when you use it. Other option is, as the right that you have there, it's to use chicken wire. And in Puerto Rico, some of my of farmers I know, they have this kind of container in different spots of the farm, and that's helped them to have this material able near to some of our crops areas, right? So if you are just gardening, or you just don't want to put your organic kitchen waste in the trash can, right? So you can use or build this kind of buckets at home, right? The one that you have on the left is in a tumble way, because that will help to turn the material inside and mix it all the time. The other one, so you will have the material in a static way. That's the reason why have all those holes to allow air to enter and pass through that material there, right? As well, you can buy some containers that are built for composting. Sometimes the price is kind of high, so that's the reason why I show you those cheap options, right? So or if you are or plans to compost in a bigger scale, so you can use pile as well. There are some compost plants that build some concrete containers to make the process, to carry out the process there, right? So the other factor or the other thing that it is really important are the ingredients. Why? Because the compost need a mix of materials that apport nitrogen and other materials that apport carbon. So when we are talking about the materials that apport nitrogen, so we will refer them as the green materials, or other people call them wet materials. But the term I'm always use is it's green materials. So what are those green materials, or what we can use as green ingredients for our compost are plant residues, including those from the garden or those from the farm. But it is really important, if we have any disease or ill plants in our farm, in our production, to discard them out of the farm. Never add them to the compost, because sometimes the pathogens, especially the fungus, the spores are really resistant to adverse conditions. And when we use that material again in our fields, we can be propagated again that disease to our plant, right? So, but if you don't have options and you need to add this because you don't have other way to dispose from those plants, that's the reason why we would be talking further about the importance of maintaining the right temperatures and keep record of your compost process, right? But in my advice, it is my advice to discard those plants out of the farm, out of the garden, out of your production, and never add them to the compost pile. Other things that we can use as a green material are uncooked food waste, such as a vegetable, fruit, coffee grounds, and eggshells. They are really good ingredients for compost. Sometimes people, when I'm just mentioned this, the people ask for cooked food, right? We can use it, but when we are composting this kind of material, sometimes we need to make other process, not just to add to the pile. So it's kind of more complex, and that will require some previous experience composting, right? But we can also compost cook food too. So we can use weed and debris, such as a grass or fresh cut branches, everything of this that keep green. We can use it as a green material for to add to our piles. In the case that we are using chips or wood, maybe wood or any material that we add to our pile, it is I highly recommend just to ship those that material, because when we have smaller pieces of the material, the compost process could occur faster, right? Especially when we are talking about in the term of wood material. And we can use citrus too. So sometimes if you read in forums or look for literature, most people does not recommend to include debris from citrus, from oranges, limes, etc. In our compost pile, because it could affect the process. But in my experience, if you cut well and if you ship well this material and you add a good amount of other materials to mix with them, they will compost as well as any other organic matter there, right? Those are examples of green materials. Eggshells are really recommended because they will apport calcium too. And a coffee ground, it's really good because sometimes it will keep the ants out of our compost piles and our area. The other kind of material that will apport carbon are the brown materials. So the brown materials, we can use dry plants, branches, and leaf that they are dry, corrugated cardboard, paper, newspapers. Always, it is supposed for more of the inks used today or nowadays to don't have any hazard chemical or component in them, right? So, but I know people that they are not sure from what kind of ink are in the paper. They those many people or some people prefer to leave out of the compost because they are not sure about where it come. But when we are composting and when we are doing in the right way, because of the temperature the compost reach, most or almost anything inside that pile will get decomposed, right? Pieces of wood, as I mentioned, we can use piece of wood from the wood that you use to build, or from some of anything about wood, you can use it. But when we are using wood, it is really important again to ship it, because wood is high on lignin. Lignin is one of the components that take longer for the microorganism to process, because it is really a strong it have a really strong structure, right? Because of the kind of cellulose that we have there and everything. So if we are working with wood, it is really important to ship it, or in the other way, the compost process will take longer, right? As well, it is my error to use that word. It is not land. We can add some dirt, some soil as a brown material to our pile. Not a huge amount, but a little, just a little bit of soil, or you know, a reasonable amount of soil. It is good to add to our piles if we don't have any other brown material able. So those are some examples of brown materials that we can use. Okay. So, but what we should not include in our compost when we are starting, because as I mentioned, every part of any living being on earth could be composted, right? But when we are starting, when we are new in this matter, I always advise to the people, especially if they are doing a compost near to home or close to their homes, not to include meat, bones, dairy products, fat and oils, pet waste, or pet manure, or any plant treated with insecticides or herbicides. Okay, let me explain this. Also, the bodies, any body of any animal, including humans, could be composted, but we need the right installation, the right facilities, and know a more specific process to make it. Because if not, they will get rotten, and they will be a lot of bad things that could happen, right? Yeah, for sure. So that's the reason why I always advise not to include any kind of meat or any rest of animal to our compost when we are learning of this, right? So dairy products are not so hard to process in the compost, but as well could alter the process if you don't have the trick, as I say, right? But if you have a pile of a good size of a pile, and you have some milk that got bad or something like this, you just can add it there and mix it, right? But do not make it in a huge amount, because that will alter the process if you are not so knowledgeable in that field. So fat and oils, it is really important not to include it especially in small piles, because they have the potential to decrease the microbial activity there. Pest waste or pet manure, it is highly not recommended to include there, especially because of the parasites that sometimes our pets could carry in their digestive system, right? So especially when we are talking about dogs and cats, sometimes the parasite eggs, as I mentioned with the spores of the fungus earlier, could be or resist really adverse conditions. So that's the reason why it is not good to include this kind of material in our compost. Any plant treated with insecticides or herbicides, especially when we are talking about the synthetic insecticides, it is not recommended to add it there. But again, if we are carrying out the compost process in the right way, there will not be any problem to add this kind of plants to our piles because of the temperature, as I mentioned a few times, will decompose those material there. So this is the graphic I just included here because I know many people are really visual for the what we can put there and what to keep out of our piles. Remember, again, when we are beginners, but when we are mastering this, we can add more of those material in the right, you know, obviously not the can, not the metals, not aluminum, no plastic, nothing of that, right? Here it is a recipe that the ones that participated, one of you that participated in our sustainable soil management webinar, just have to see there, but I will not enter in details in this recipe. I just put in here because that will give you an idea of how to mix the materials in the soil in the compost pile. Okay, so what is really important is this part, especially a constant humidity must be maintained to optimize the composting process. Okay, how I know that I have the right amount of water or humidity in my compost pile? It is really, industrial compost plants, they have sensors, they have other methods to know a specific humidity there in the piles or in the compost, but you don't need to have all that equipment. So one good measure that you can use is by squeezing some of this material. So what you will do, it is with caution, you will open a hole in your pile, in the compost pile. Try to go as further as you can to the center of the pile and grab using a shovel, right? Because there sometimes the temperature will be really high. So just take a little bit of that material when it is when the temperature low, you just squeeze, get in your hand and squeeze that material. So if this material just left you a thin film of water in your hand, that's the right point or have the right humidity. If the material does not left you any or just a little bit of water in your hand, you need to add more water to the pile. In the other way, if when you squeeze this, you have a lot of water coming out of that material, so you have much more moisture that you need in the pile. So what you can do at this point, if you have higher humidity that the one that you need in the pile, you can add more brown material, and that will help you, or dry material, right, to absorb that excess of water within the pile. So another important thing it is to maintain okay, for the compost process to happen, the temperature will need to reach between 140 to 160 Fahrenheit degrees. In Celsius, that should be around 70 to 80 Celsius or 90 Celsius degrees. So once the compost reaches that temperature, it is really important to maintain that temperature for almost 7 days, or not almost, my bad, for not less than 7 days. Why? Because at this point, when we maintain the temperature of at that level for all those straight days, you are ensuring that all the pathogens there, all the hazard materials or whatever is on your pile are getting decomposed, right? So that's the reason why I said a few slides ago that it is really important to keep a record of your compost, especially a record of the temperature. How many times I need to take the temperature in my compost pile? Most recommended is to take it daily. But if you are not taking daily because you have a lot of work to do as happen in the farms, at least take it each 2 days, okay? Each 2 days, or in the worst situation, each 3 days, no more than this, okay? Because we want to know what is happening there. And if you don't take constantly the temperature, you cannot assure that you maintain the right temperature for 7 straight days at least, right? So that's the reason why it's really important to maintain, to keep that record. Other thing that is really important, and it is highly recommended, it's to turn the compost pile or where you're doing the compost, all that material, to turn it, because that will help you to air that pile. And when you have enough oxygen there, enough air in the pile, so the process will occur faster, right? We were talking at the beginning that this is process, it is an anaerobic process. So when you're turning your pile, you are accelerating this process. How many times we can turn our compost? From twice a week to once during the entire process. That all depend about the conditions that you have there. If you don't have equipment and you have a huge pile, so that pile, it is hard to turn it. So sometimes it's preferable to maintain static that pile, and you just keep mixing as possible for you the material within the piles. Also, I don't know how many of you have experience with this kind of projects, but as well, there are some methods or some systems where more developed systems for composting, where we have the floor in concrete, and we have a grill within this floor with industrial blowers that blow air through the piles in this. So you can see those systems in more in compost plants, and they are providing air, and for that reason they does not have to turn those piles. But as well, so just using PVC pipes with hose along the pipes and put it inside, make an arrangement with those pipes inside our piles, we are allowing to keep our pile static, but as well we are securing that cold air pass through that pipes, because the pile will be hot in the center. So that temperature, that high temperature there, will do that the more less hot air flow through those piles to the center again of the pile. So what I will do, it is to share this kind of arrange that we can do with using PVC pipes when Pam sent the follow-up email with the presentation and other information about composting, right? How long it take the process? The process could take from 1 to 10 months. All that depends of the material we are composting, the size of our pile, and other conditions as a weather condition, right? Other things to be considered in our compost process, it is the compost is very wet. As I mentioned, it will smell bad. That will indicate that the compost is, the pile is rotting, it is not composting. In this case, as I just mentioned, you can apply more brown materials. If it's raining a lot, as happened for seasons in the tropics, you can cover the piles. In the market, you can find some tarps that are specifically that are specific for that purpose, and you can leave that that tarps in your covering your pile, but sometimes are kind of expensive. So you can use a more efficient method for you. It's just to buy a regular tarp. Those are the blue ones or the gray ones that you find on the market, and cover the pile during the rain event. And then the next day, or does not leave it covered for more than 2 days, in my opinion, or in my recommendation, just to remove just remove that pile, and that will help you to maintain most of that rainwater out of your pile. It is to dry, and the pile will never reach the optimum the optimal temperature, right? This is so important, because if we don't have the right humidity there, as I mentioned, and I will keep mentioning, the temperature will never rise. And that is one of the most common errors that we do when we are new or when we are starting to make our compost. Most important of all, the above recipe, the recipe I shared 2 slides ago, it's the ideal recipe, but as I just mentioned, I put there for you to have an idea on how to mix the brown and green materials. But you will work with what you have able and what is most convenient for you, right? If we'll need green and brown materials, yes, we will need, but don't get crazy trying to have the right amount of each one in the piles. Really basic. So you think that you should have in that pile more green material than brown material. So that's the relation carbon nitrogen that we need to have there, right? Because the green material and the brown material, talking more in more scientific way, what it's doing, it is that we need a balance of carbon and nitrogen to promote all that microbial activity and that is necessary for the compost process to happen, okay? So here you can see some example of composting. The first picture at your left, it's our kind of more bigger piles of compost that it is, you can have, those piles are typically, you can see it in medium-sized form. At your right, you have a small pile. Sometimes it is suitable for gardening, or if your production it's small, or if you just want to start try in a small scale. So you can have a pile as to this size. What I advise it is to make piles no smaller or no smaller than 3 feet, okay? Because when we have all that material together, that will promote a best composting process. As well as the compost process will be happening, it is normal to the size will get reduced, right? Because all that material are passing through that decomposing process. So it is normal. I also include there a picture of a thermometer, and this is a highly recommended tool or a basic tool that you need to have to make your compost. Thermometer, the probe of that thermometer, if you see the picture, it's alike of the ones that we use in the kitchen, but in a bigger size. So you can get one of those in the market for between a good one for $20 to $30. They are more expensive, right? But at least if you will buy one, just buy it enough, with enough probe length as proportional to the price that you have plans to make it, right? Sometimes you can have one from 60 centimeters or 2 feet up to 4 feet or 120 centimeters, right? So those are the most common ones, but you can find it more bigger than this. Okay, so just buy one. If you can get one in I forgot the name of that material. Oh my God, I just forgot it. If you can find it in on a stainless steel, it is better. It's a way expensive, but that will last for a huge amount of years, right? So you can find it online. You can find it in some hardwares and gardening centers too. And again, it is really important because remember, you must keep record of the temperature in your compost. Talking about the temperature, if you see that chart there that show in terms of time and temperature what is happening within our pile. So there you can find as the temperature rise, what kind of microorganisms are working inside the piles. And when you see in the first phase, when the temperature is rising, it's what we call mesophilic phase. And there you will find bacteria and fungi working there. So when the temperature rise it is when we name or call it thermophilic phase of the compost process, right? So there you will find another kind of microorganisms, especially thermophilic bacteria and some beneficial fungus, right? So in that phase, as I mentioned, and you can see in this chart, it is when the pathogen are getting eliminated from the soil, from the pile, my bad, from the pile, as well the decomposition of any other hazard systems that we can have there. Then the temperature will decrease after at least 7 days, right? It's when it's the time, as I just mentioned a few slides ago, I'm just saying again to keep in your mind, after 7 days at least, those temperature will drop again, and again the mesophilic microflora will rise within that pile. As well, in that phase, from the cooling to the maturation stages, we will see other decomposing, dueling animals getting in our compost. Some insects, some sometimes earthworms, many of other animals are getting there because they are naturally make that function in the natural cycles of organic matter decomposition, right? So it is normal to find them there. As well, you can see there the variation on the acid of the pH of the pile there. When most of the compost, and I say most because sometimes we can find some compost that have a little bit low pH, but most of compost are in the range from 6 to 6.5 to 7.5 pH. So that's the reason why they are good to balance the pH in the soil, right? Okay, so we've been talking more in the aspects of small to medium size compost projects, right? But as well, we can, or there are many industrial composting plants, right? So as we see here, those piles are under a roof, especially because when we are doing this in bigger sizes as well, if you have the facilities to do it under the roof, it is really recommended, because there you can control of have a better control of humidity in the pipes, right? So here you can see some example at the right picture. What you are seeing, it is a turner, a compost turner, right? Industrial compost projects are happening in the States, in Europe, in Latin America, in many places, and they are some of those projects that are really, really huge with a lot of technology. Okay, but sometimes the technology that we just need, it is a shovel and a sift to make our compost. That's all, right? But if you are interested to know more about this kind of projects, you can look for examples in one of the masters of composting, industrial composting process are the Germans. In Germany, they has been developing this kind of projects for decades, and working with to develop more technologies to help to make this more efficient. As well, in America, you can look for examples in Colombia. Colombia has been working with this for a while too, okay? So, but let's see one of those examples of composting, industrial composting process in a dairy farm in the next slide, okay? I just want to share this video, part of this video with you guys.
What is, I believe we can't hear the video right now.
So I will stop here with the video. It will take a few minutes more, so you can see in complete when we share the presentation. But it's almost the you will see a little bit more of what you already see it. That is an example of an industrial medium to large size compost project, and I also included because what we have not talked about it. It is about the manure. So manure from animals, uh, they are really they could be included in our compost. So many of our of compost that I have experience using are full manure from, especially from cows, right? Uh, when we are composting manure, our final product most time will have more nutrients of just as a compost don't make it made from vegetative material, right? Why? Because that material come with a pre-process in the digestive systems of the animals that accelerate that decomposition process, as well add more other kind of microflora to that material, right? So I saw in the chat that we have some question about this. We will be attending those questions in a few minutes. But manure, especially cow, goat, lamb, could be used, rabbit, horse too. Pig manure could be used, but when we are talking about to use pig manure, we need to be so careful because the pig manure it's more liquid, right? Have a higher amount of water on it, right? So sometimes when we are using this to produce compost, we need to have in our system in the pig farm what we call a solid filter or a structure that permit us to separate the solid phase from the liquid phase. So that solid phase, it's what we can use to compost, right? To compost in that. But as well, this process, when we are using pig manure, we need to be really, let me see what the right word, we need to be really, really careful with this, and we need to be monitoring that process really, really hard, because if we don't rise the temperature of that product, if we don't reach those degrees, the potential for that product to have any pathogens or parasites are really, really high, because the pigs in the system of the pigs, they are really alike of humans, right? That's the reason why decades ago insulin for diabetes was obtained from pigs, right? So that's the reason why when we are composting this kind of material, we need to be really careful and done that process really well. Also, we can add some microorganisms that we can rise in our farm, or also we can buy it in a commercial way that will help to kill all those pathogens in that material, right? So what I want to say in this way, it is that if you have plans to make this and you don't have experience, look for an expert in that field composting this. As well, when we are composting any kind of manure, so we have more potential to impact water bodies, right? Because as I mentioned, the amount of nutrients there, especially when we are working with chicken manure. Okay, so the uses for this material. So before using, it is recommended, or you must sift that material and obtain the finest part of the product, right? That's the way when you're sifting this product, is when you secure to or ensure to obtain this material, that humus, the material I was talking at the beginning of the presentation, right? So you will use the thinner part of that material, what it is compost, the real compost. As I mentioned, you could not identify the raw material that you use it to make it, at that point, also it smells well and it is not hot. Okay, if that material keep hot, it is not mature at that point. Okay, so you need to put back on the pile and keep composting. So when you're sifting, what you do with the more coarse material, just put again on the pile and keep it composted until it is ready, right? The compost can be applied on the ground or above the ground, or you also can incorporate that material to the soil matrix. When you're doing or when you're using for short cycle crops, it is highly recommended to incorporate in the matrix of the soil. But if you will use that compost for perennials crops, you can just add in the same way that you add any other fertilizer to the top of the soil, around the trees and around your crop. So that's another way to use it. Also, if you are using for a short-term crops and you don't have the time or the equipment to incorporate it into the soil matrix, you can also leave it in the upper part of the soil and works well. Another thing that I do when I'm farming, I'm been quit from the farming for almost year and a half. I need to admit this, but when I farming or when I gardening for vegetables, what I do is to put a bunch of compost in each hole that I will make the transplant of the seedlings, or where I will sow any seed. Okay. Another way to use the compost is making a compost tea and that tea you can apply it into the soil as in drainage to the soil, or also in the body of the plants. Compost tea are really easy to make it. You just need water. If you have fish tanks air pump, depending of the container you will use, you can use it on a small one. And it is highly recommended to have some source of a simple sugar. It's really common to use molasses because of the accessibility and the cost, right? But in other parts, also use sugar cane use, or even use some sugar, okay? But you use what you have more, the material you have access to it, and it is cheaper, right? So you can make this by brew that tea, just mixing all of those material, leave it with the air pump. In my experience, I always brew that tea for 48 hours. Other people just do it for 24 hours. Other people like to make it for 72 hours. So what you can find in the literature, it is that when you are brewing that tea, if you are more interested in have higher populations of bacteria, brew for less time. When you brew for more time, for longer period, you are promoting the growing of fungus. All of them beneficial to our soil and our crops. Okay. Right here, you can see a younger Waris at at the picture of the left with a good friend. This is a model of a homemade sift in a tumble way that one of our friends built it from a sketch that he find online, and it was using some PVCs and some parts of buckets in the tumble, right, with chicken wire, and you just can sift your compost using this. I think we built that for less than 20 bucks. Okay. The other model that you can use is the one at the right. It is a little more complex model, but you can make it at home too, and it's really really useful. In my opinion, the chicken wire use it for the mesh. It's the hole. It's must be a little smaller, right? Also, those concepts, you can find it in more industrial or more bigger way, right? So you can buy those kind of tumble sifters. You can find in the market a huge gamma of those products, right? From household use to industrial for purposes, right? At the right, you can see one that it is homemade too, but in a bigger scale. You can make it this using metal too instead of wood, right? And if you are looking for industrial one, here is one of example. And please see this material at the left, that pile. Did you see it? It just looked like the pictures of humus I show at the beginning of this presentation, right? So that it is what we have, the compost we want to have to put in our soil. This is ready compost, okay?